They say that a woman gave birth to the land and sea and to all that is visible.
Various civilizations have stories about their people's beginning. These stories over time may be viewed as myths and legends, and were transmitted orally from one generation to the next, until they were written down. These stories record the birth of a culture and its people in a new land. There are misinterpretations about the origin story, and in 1967, Janice Beatty authored the History of Guam book, Discovering Guam, which she spelled Fuuna as Fuuna, F-U-U-N-A, and that the site celebrated in our origin story is in Fuha, in modern-day Humatak.
We have a brother and sister spirit, born of the infiniteness of space, of no mother and no father. When the brother is about to die, he empowers the sister to create the world for man. It wasn't lost on us that this is the story of a beginning. And for a culture such as ours, the beginning would be the human colonization of this island, following initial discovery of the island, the initial discovery and exploration of the island. So this had something to do with, this story has something to do with an ancient Austronesian speaking people who explored this region of the Pacific in the prehistoric past, discovered these islands, and ultimately relocated their matrilineages, I presume, here. We decided to take a look at that story a little bit more closely. When we wanted to look at the story and see if we could correlate what we know of the culture to aspects of the story. At that point in time, humans had yet to explore this part of the world. This part of the world was the unknown. This was infinite space. The unexplored ocean was infinite space to them.
Like a coconut that has fallen from the mother tree, right? Come out here to Guahan, right, and the Marianas, and it grows on its own, establishing a new society here. And so Pontan, even though he was the navigator that discovered this place, him being a man could not claim the land, which is why he brought his sister with him, who was equal to him in rank, to claim the land for their bloodline.
Thinking back again, these are seafaring Austronesian speaking people. The only time such people would be without their mother and father is when they are on new land that has yet to receive the bones of their ancestors. That again is a reference to how an Austronesian speaking male would empower his sister at that time period. And he did so, we believe, by first voyaging, discovering new land, returning home with knowledge of it, and should they have need in the future, relocate their families to the new land.
These characters or these names of people should be indigenous words. They should mean something to us right off the bat, something associated with some kind of beginning or creation, as it is being taught by others right now. Fuuna and Pontan. Pontan means a point in Spanish, and Fuuna, some people even go as far as saying Fauna, some maybe even Fiona. As of right now, to the best of my knowledge, that doesn't mean anything.
The way they put information into their oral histories, names would have been very important. The two names in this creation story are Pontan, In the historical record, the names are given as Pontan, the brother spirit, and the sister spirit in the historical literature is typically referred to as Fuudna or Fuudnya. And when we looked at those two words, we realized that because of the structure of the names, those words, that couldn't be Chamorro.
Almost every word that was written in historical documents is, they wrote it down as best they could, There's bound to be, almost all of them are misspelled. To us now that we have a writing system and orthography, of course the spelling is going to be very different.
First, let me define the term Pontan. Pontan is a stage of growth for a coconut. And a Pontan coconut is a coconut that has ripened and fallen from the tree, from the mother tree, and now is already sprouting anew. The tree symbolizes the family, the lineage of the family. In Western society, the tree that they tend to think of in Western society as that which represents their lineage tends to be a deciduous type tree, a multi-branched tree with deep roots, each branch representing a branch of the family.
What is the most important tree to us as islanders out here in the Pacific? The coconut tree. Pontan, the ripe coconut that has fallen from the tree and can now grow on its own.
The coconut can fall from the mother tree, roll away, and perhaps even land in the water and float away and colonize a new land. The coconut tree very aptly represented or symbolized what these ancient peoples did when they moved from island to island, colonizing new lands.
These people were not mystical, magical beings. These are actual names of people who actually lived at one point in time, whose names have achieved legendary mythical status because of what they've done.
Westerners, previous observers, when they were recording information that they were hearing from the Chamorros, they often made certain mistakes in their use of certain vowel sounds or consonant sounds, and we saw a particular pattern.
As they're transcribing based on their culture, their spelling, their orthography, and how they view life in general, just on their survival. So you have the Spanish recording it one way, you have the French recording it another way, you have the English or the British recording it. I have Scottish ancestry, I'm not too sure if they record it differently. All those influences, and then you have Chamorros who possibly learning English at the time, so there's phonetically spelling things, and that's where some of the variations come into play. Is any one of those census enumerators could have phonetically spelled it based on their culture. So you'll see a variety of names that have been modified, morphed, or why there's a Fedzerang versus Feheren. That's one primary example of names just morphing when they could have been from the same family.
Fuudna or Fuudnya, that again wasn't Chamorro. And when we looked at the story, that this female was empowered by her brother after he had discovered the land and brought her here. He relocated his matrilineage here. When he did that, his sister would have become the first paramount female chief. That man who did that would have become the first Chamorro male paramount chief. His sister would have become the first female paramount chief.
Due to our colonial history, the oral transmission and knowledge of this story from one generation to the next had ceased. A few decades ago, we started relearning some of our oral traditions based on writings of observers that were interpreted and incorporated in contemporary literature. These texts have become obsolete, yet are still being taught in schools across the archipelago.
There's a lot of our people out there that are still uneducated about the Chamorro history, because growing up as a child, I'm influenced by a lot of traditional values and traditional practices through my grandmothers and my father. But in school, we were not educated about our history. We had to learn more about American government, American history, remembering the presidents of the United States, the capital of California, the capital of Washington, the capital of... And then we had to learn the world history. But when it came to the Chamorro history, all we had was Don Pedro Sanchez's book, The Stick, the Guam history. And that's all we had to work with. And that encompassed maybe a chapter on the pre-contact part, and then the rest of it was political and government issues that stemmed from the 1950, the war, the Organic Act, and everything like that. And the book was this thick, but that's what it covered a lot. So it didn't really say anything about who we were, where we came from, what we are, you know. And now people are starting to surface a lot of those information. And that's the sad thing about it. In the 50s and the 60s, we were never educated about our people. We just started to know about Hurao and Gado and Malagueña and Taga. And that just happened like within the past 30 years. But because we were, for lack of better words, we were rudely interrupted historically, we have to now kind of fill in the gaps. Because from that point and then 300 years of rude interruption, I call it genocide, and then now we're here and we have to fill in that gap.
To me, when I started teaching history of Guam, that was the first time I really thought about it with any seriousness. Because I was having to, now try to teach this whole history of our people. It's part of a body of knowledge that's really an oral tradition. After the Chamorros have been here for thousands and thousands of years, right? And after thousands of years, at some point, people have started writing it down. But most of us, at least my generation and older, we first heard these as myths and legends. And so I remember, as a kid, just hearing these. It was just part of these stories I used to hear. Sirena, just these different stories. Now, of course, a story that's thousands of years old, that's only in, the last 100 years been written down, of course you're going to find different variations of it. It's just like any story. Imagine after even 1 week, sometimes the story has changed in different ways. So you will see different versions of the story, but I think that the main point of it is still, I think, fairly clear. It's never really, to me, it's never been given the respect it deserves as a cultural creation account, right? Most cultures around the world have some kind of creation account. And that's important. I mean, today people can say, oh, that's just all, made up, really it's this evolution or whatever they believe in, right? But I think that's beside the point. The point is that every culture, has their way of kind of explaining themselves. And for the Chamorros, that story is so important because it shows us that basically that the Chamorros believed that from the moment of creation, the moment of birth, that men and women were working together. And in many creation stories, women aren't part of it at all. So already you're seeing early on that the Chamorros believed that women had a role in society. This wasn't a product of the women's liberation movement in the 70s, This is ancient. And part of that role was also a reflection of the matrilineal society in which brothers and sisters worked together. Power was shared between men and women, right? Starting with the creation account, but all through the Chamorro political structure. So the Chamorro chiefly system had a place for both male and female chiefs. The female chief was not the wife of the male chief. This is kind of a modern redefinition of Magahaga. The Magalahi and Magahaga were brother-sister. And so it shows you, again, the sharing of power between men and women, but specifically between brothers and sisters. So every person, male or female, when they tell you what clan they're from, they'll tell you, this is my mother, and this was her mother, and her mother. You trace your whole genealogy along your mother's line. And that's important because that tells you what land you'll inherit, what land you'll live on. You're not going to live on your husband's land or whatever. You're going to live on the land of your mother, who got it from her mother and who got it from her mother, right? And so in this whole system, obviously women are important because it's their genealogy that's determining who's going to live on what land.
I don't look at it so much as, the Adam and Eve story, but I look at it as the arrival into the islands. Those, the diaspora from wherever our ancestors came from, Fona and Pontan must have been significant leaders, for them to be remembered, and for them to be honored, for that story to exist. Somewhere in the middle, between legends, you will find some kind of truth to it.
We've come to look at the creation story not just as a myth, but as symbolism circa a few millennia in the past. It's really an oral historical deed to the land. Back then, we had nothing like that. Everything was transmitted orally. When this Jesuit priest who recorded the story was witnessing these Chamorro women, these Matao women, in the performance of that song and dance, what they were actually doing was displaying to that priest that this is their land. The possession of the song, the possession of the story, is their way of showing ownership of the land. And that's the way we see the song.
Contemporary literature notes that the site associated with Fortna is in Fuha, present-day Humatak, while other evidence suggests that it's in another location. In Freycinet's text, circa 1819, he lists geographical positions of important place names in ancient Guahan. He noted that Fortna Rock is in a separate location than Fuha in modern-day Humatak.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that actually, but I have read two accounts from, these are in the Rodrigue Lebec translations, and these are from the 1600s that directly relate. One is a Spanish accounts that the Chamorros would sometimes make pilgrimages to Fuha Rock. So, and as you know, for the Spanish, they were trying to understand all this, right? To them, it was all paganism. So, but they saw that as there's something going on there, right? And so clearly some kind of thanksgiving, or maybe, you know, appreciation for maybe, you know, saving the family through a crisis. Who knows what, right? But that was a place where they would have some kind of ritual.
Father Sanvitores noted that Fortna is celebrated among these natives because they point out a rock there from which they believe that all men had their origin. It is near several harbors and from one cape that points west, northwest, and which rises 36 to 48 feet above the sea.
Some refer to it as Fuha in Humatak, but some are also saying there may be this other place near Hagat. But today, remember, the lines of delineation between villages today are different than they were back then. So we don't know exactly which is what at what time. And so it could be either one, we don't know.
In 1602, Fray Juan Pobre noted that the two leading people live in two of the largest villages. One is Fortna and the other is Humatak.
I think further research is required for us to be able to identify the actual location of that particular guput that the Chamorro of that time were participating in. I'm not so sure it was there. I think we need to do more research. I think before we jump into certain things like that, we just need to research it further. More of an inventory of the language, more of an inventory of the historical accounts, and more analysis of that needs to be done before we do anything like that. I think one of the problems we've had in our modern society is that in our rush to define our heritage, we sometimes make mistakes.
Before we argue and debate and change Fuuna and Punta to Fortna, let us all believe that that aspect exists. And then once you believe all of that, and it's already a natural thing, then we can ingest the change.
Due to the various spellings and names of the two siblings in our creation story, I decided that I wanted to do further research and understand what the names really mean. Fortna, the first, Pontan, the ripe coconut. These two names are symbolic and representative of our beginning here in the Marianas.
I'm willing to make changes, and there's only a few of us that think that way, you know.
That's why the understanding of our indigenous language is crucial to this. Our ancestors left us clues in everything, in their name, in the names of people, places, and things. History is there. We today just have to learn it well enough to kind of crack the code, if you will, of our ancestors, to understand exactly what it is they're trying to tell us. But there's history everywhere, and The more we learn about it, the more we can learn more about ourselves and thus learn more about how we are connected to other peoples in the world. Because although we might have a lot in common because of our colonial history, we have more in common with others because of our ancient pre-contact history.
There are variations of the origin story across the archipelago. A long letter written by a Jesuit priest in the island of Luta noted a response from his conversation with a Makana. He said, "O Sina, we believe that the stars in the sky grow as the trees do on earth. As far as the sun and moon are concerned, we believe that our old songs say, which is that Pontan gave life to Atsa, who after the death of Pontan took his eyes to make the sun and moon, the skin of his abdomen to make the firmament, his shoulders to make the earth with mountains and valleys. He took the other bones to make all creatures, and he took his wind to make thunder, and his urine to make the sea." In this account, we are introduced to a new character in the origin story, Atsa. Based on the information presented, I firmly believe that before any literature newly published or revised, that an editor familiar with the Chamorro language and culture be consulted. In addition, I firmly believe and recommend that we should transition our use of Fuunan Pontan to the more suitable names, Fotna and Pontan. Furthermore, I believe that a monument should be built in modern-day Haget to commemorate our beginning.
Papi